Your angling in 2019, Tel, has seen quite a bit of variety, but this particular chapter we're going to talk about today sees you back on a sort of low stock, intimate pit, and that seems to be a bit of a common occurrence every few years. Why do you think that is?
They're the special ends, aren't they? I don't know what. It's just how it's always been. You know, if you go right back to my first ever 40-pounder, Basil, you know, you had a 10-acre lake, 10 carping. The one we're about to talk about was 5 or 6 acres with half a dozen carping, you know, 1 carp per acre. I mean, that's a low stock, but really that's loads. There's loads in there. You look at somewhere like Raysbury, you know, that was 120 acres with probably 20 carp. So sort of 4 or 5 acres per fish, you know, so they've just always been my favourite. I find them more rewarding, you know. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love fishing places that have got lots of carp in as well. Probably the last place I fished like that was Wasing. I absolutely loved it. It keeps you sharp, keeps you in tune, but I've got to be honest, my favourite of all is the low stock ones, the tricky ones. They're quieter as well, aren't they? Not everybody wants to do that.
So I suppose this story starts, Tel, sort of mid-2018 after you finished on the tunnels?
Late July, yeah, straight after the tunnels lake. I'd bought the ticket back in February, March time. It was one of those places you only had a short window to get the ticket, you know. If you hadn't got it by the end of March, then you weren't going to get it. So I'd bought it not really knowing whether I was going to use it. I could have been on the tunnels all year for all I know, but you have to be thinking ahead, don't you? You know, and I'd got the ticket early. I started in late July. It's probably easier to find carp at that time of the year than it is in April. Yeah, it wasn't a bad thing. In fact, the very first evening I walked around, I saw one bow wave across the open water. There was a dark overhang, like a shady overhang of trees. And the bow wave subsided there, and that was the first spot that I baited up. I went back again the following morning, put a little bit more bait in there. The following morning again, put a little bit more bait in there, and on that occasion I saw one creep past, close in along the ledge. Very early, and it's dark as well, you know. All I could make out was like a grey dorsal line as it swum through, but that was good enough for me. I knew he'd been on the bait. I put a little bit more bait in there, and the very next day I went back on my kit.
So you've already mentioned this is a low stock venue, Tel. What fish, you know, really took your fancy on this place?
Well, there was 2, both commons. Biggest one was known as Springgates, after the legend himself, Peter Springate. I'm not sure that Pete ever fished the pool in its present state, as if it's only a small pool, 5 or 6 acres. But where the little pool lies, many, many years ago, there used to be a much, much bigger lake, which, without going into too much detail, Pete is certainly very famous for fishing for. So Springgates was the #1 target, and I'd seen shots of that fish sort of up to high 30s, you know, over the years. Old carp, real slow grower. Long fish, it had a sort of bald patch on one flank, bit of character to it, you know, really long, bald patch along one flank, but lovely rounded head, peachy cheeks, you know, lovely overslung mouth, real corker. The other one, I mean, Springgates was a really elusive carp, you know, you rarely saw it in the water, you know, let alone on the bank. The other big one was known as white tips, and that one, because as its name suggests, it had white tips on the ends of its fins. In fact, over the years, the fins have got whiter and whiter. It's got virtually all its pecks are white, and so's its tail, even a little bit of white along the dorsal line. Just as elusive when it comes to seeing it on the bank, you know, very rarely caught, but you'd see that one in the water an awful lot more, you know, for obvious reasons. Other than those 2, the 2 bigger ones, there was at least another 4 carp in there. When it comes to good fish, there was another one, a long common, sort of mid-30, real nice one. Another common, again a real nice old one, a dark one that was sort of 30, 31 pound. And then you had a little common that was a mid-double. So only a handful of carp. Oh, and one more, I don't know how I missed that, you have 1 mirror. Like, so 5 commons and the 1 mirror. And the mirror was probably a mid-20, 26, 27 pound.
So your first trip, you've been putting a bit of bait in, and you've seen at least one.
See one scoop through, yeah.
How did you get on?
Well, do you remember we had all that really hot weather at that time of the year? It was cooking hot for weeks, wasn't it? And it was more luck than judgment, you know, it just happened to be the timing was right. But my first night, which was only the day after I see that one come past tight into the edge, we had the first rains for ages. Rainy, windy. I mean, it wasn't so windy there because you're really enclosed, really loads of big trees all around a little pool, but perfect conditions for fishing, you know, it freshened everything right up. I remember as I was setting up, so I got there in the morning but didn't put the rods out until about midday. So one rod. Most of my time fishing there was only ever one rod. And it was a spot in the edge, and I had to, basically I could go for a little bit of undergrowth, lower in, and then with my chest waders on, I had to get back in the water and then feed the rod back round to where the swim was, fishing it at sort of a right angle up the margin. I had my little baiting up pouch around me, my hook link in it, all ready to go, a couple of tigers, same old, couple of little tigers ready to loop on, and that was in my pouch. So I just had a bare lead on, tied on. And I thought, well, before lowering in, just to make sure, because you couldn't quite see the bottom, you know, it did have a little tinge of colour to it, and I was fishing in probably 6-7 foot, you know. But I thought I'll have a little donk about first, just to make sure, 'cause it was quite rocky down there. And I remember just as I donked about a couple of times, a big sheet of bubbles came up off the bottom. I thought, no, I'd obviously spooked something, you know. Anyway, I lifted the rig out, there was not a lot I could do about it now. I'd found the bit that I wanted, and I'm just looping the hook link on, and I looked up, and the mirror was there. And it was obviously what I'd spooked, and he'd spooked off, come round in an arc, and was there like that, looking at me. And as I saw it, and off it went, big vortex. I thought, I'm not catching that one tonight. Anyway, I got that rig in, another little handful of bait around it. Like I say, it was only midday, late afternoon. The wind was blowing up the other way, but because it's such a small pool, it's weird how it works, but it's all surrounded by willows, so you get lots of stuff falling off the trees, all the flotsam, all the fluff, you know, lots of leaves and stuff. But rather than all going up, it depended how the wind had hit the lake, but on this particular wind direction, rather than going to wherever the wind was blowing, all the fluff and flotsam would gather in this calmer part of the lake. It'd almost sort of push it round, swirl it round. So it looked carpy as hell, you know, like really did look the one. And in the evening time, the rod's already in position. In the evening time, a couple of fish head and shoulders as well. Not over the spot, just out from it. But that's classic when fish roll close to a margin spot. They often show a rod length or so away and then creep back into the edge, you know, as they go back down. So it was looking game on. And I won't dwell on the catches too much, but the following morning I caught two, which for the first night on the pond was pretty mad. I had the long common, absolute belter, big long thing at 34 pounds, 8 ounces. And I caught another one which they call Nemo. He's got one little stubby fin, and that was 30 pounds 8. Like I say, we won't go into too much detail on those catches, right result, but they turn into film stars a little bit later on, so we'll save them for later. Yeah, don't get the wrong impression. Two the first night. I did catch another one only 3 or 4 nights later. I had the little common from the open water. But being honest with you, I blanked about 20 nights on the trot after that. Like really difficult. What I found was when it comes to fishing the open water, like the edges is lovely. You know, it's so good. It's because it's all close and you can get perfect presentation all the time. But out in that open water, I didn't realise it at the time. You'd cast out and get a drop, but it wasn't, it was deceiving, you know, and the whole bottom of the lake had sort of a really light, fluffy covering of silkweed, which was fibrous. Do you know what I mean? And it'd catch the hook. You always knew when you hadn't been fishing properly all night, if you was on perfect clean ground, then the points used to corrode overnight. But if you reeled in those rigs in the morning, they were perfectly sharp with a little bit of weed on, you knew you'd been hanging up all night, you know.
So it sounds like a real struggle, Tell, but did you feel like you were, you know, obviously you're still learning the lake, were you making progress, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in those 20 odd nights, I lost one, to be honest with you. You know, I'm pretty sure it was the long common. Again, we won't dwell on it too much, but yeah, I was learning stuff. There was one swim in particular where I spent a lot of time, and it was at the wide end of the lake. It was lovely. It was like it was a big overhang of trees in the woods. You know, like a natural bivvy. After time I never even had my brolly up under there. But it was at the wider end of the lake, and then the lake got narrow as it went away from me. And from that one swim I could see the whole lake. And not only, I could even see it at night as well, because the far end of the lake there was a road with all the lights, and in the morning that's where the sun had come up as well. So the sky would go light there first. But from that one swim I learnt loads. And what I learnt where they'd done a lot of their feeding, which was down the opposite end to where I'd done the bulk of my early nights. But yeah, you'd either see one flop out in the morning or a little bit of bubbling. You know what it's like, it's typical, whenever you go round there, they're not there, you know, but I learnt that it was an area that they like to feed. You piece things together over time, don't you? A lot of the time I almost feel like I'm camping, you know, but learning all the while. And when it got to the end of September, down that far end of the lake where I'd often seen stuff going on, I came really close. I can remember it was a Saturday night, and I'd seen a couple feeding close in, and I'd set my traps. and then in the morning a couple flopped out further out, and there was a little clear area there. I was starting to, you know, when you feel yourself getting closer and closer. And it's funny how things work out, but that same day I got news that my little grey ticket was starting earlier than I'd expected. This was a Saturday, and I'd just been told it was going to be starting on the Monday. So without confusing things too much, that's when I went off and changed and went for the little grey instead. I didn't say it in the little grey field, but when I went there, you know, the water quality wasn't looking so good. Basically, for the first couple of weeks, I was torn, and I was flitting back and forth between the Commons Lake and the little grey lake. And well, you know what happened at the little grey pond. You know, that's a story already told. But long story short, I was back within a month, and between the end of October and Christmas sort of time, I must have blanked another dozen or so nights. Got beat up again. I'd see them regular. You know, especially underneath the snags, right up until the first frost. I'd find them under there most days. White tips in particular, you know, you'd see his old tail going. I remember after catching the little grey, I was on a caster tip, wasn't I, you know, and I had a couple of pints left in the fridge. I hadn't used casters on the common pond up to then, but having just caught the little grey, and I thought, well, this is going to be the answer to catch these wily old commons. And there was 2 or 3 occasions, like I said, right into December, where I got those fish feeding in sort of that much water underneath the snags. But that was the problem. I could get them feeding, like if you imagine behind the snags, you had an overhang that went out and it was almost hollowed out behind them. And I could get them feeding tight, and I could get them feeding down into about 6 foot. I remember on one occasion having spring gates feeding down there in quite cold conditions as well. But I'd get them feeding there all the way to the overhang. But the problem is that the ledge there was like really, really steep. So although I could get them feeding down into about 6 foot, my rig, although it was only a metre away, 6 foot away at most, it was in 9 foot, and they just wouldn't drop down into that depth. Like, so a lot of people think that in the winter months, you know, you automatically go for the deeper water, but when you spend a day in December watching them feeding in 2 or 3 foot, and you've got depths down to 18 foot, you know that in that deep water, it might as well be the abyss. You've got absolutely no chance.
So this brings us up to spring 2019, Tel. When did you start back on there, and did you have a plan of action in your mind?
Do you know what? I started off the spring fishing a little bit further up the map. But you know, it's like, no, I don't like unfinished business, you know, and it was still on my mind, the Commons Lake. I stopped off on the way home one day. I'd heard there was a few people fishing it. That was one of the reasons I never went straight back there. But when I walked around, it was as quiet as it had always been, you know. Nobody there. The swims didn't appear to be too fished. And on top of that, the water was crystal clear. You know, it's like at that time of the spring, it just pulls you back, doesn't it, you know? All of the foliage, there's a lot of willow around the lake, and it was all starting to get that early lime green tinge to it, you know. The reeds were starting to poke up, kingfishers darting about, it was all going on. You know, spring always starts off, you know, you see the first signs of spring in February, but you know, your snowdrops and all the rest of it. But it's a real slow start, February, March, even into April, isn't it? Once it gets to mid-April through into May, it accelerates. And that's what it was like. We were at that time of the year. I walked it 2 early mornings as well, 2 early mornings on the bounce. Again, nobody there. Sea fish showing as well, but they were more in the deeper water, and I was more interested in the shallower water with what I knew was coming. You know, this was sort of middle to the end of April, and you know what it's like come May, June, you know, those fish are going to be up in the water a little bit more on the shallow bits. Now there was one bit, I've already said how from my favourite viewing swim, I'd already learnt that the fish liked that far into the lake quite a lot, where it narrowed up. And down that end, that was where the bars was. You had 2 or 3 shallow bars. One of them was really, really close to the bank. And I'd already learned, we'd had that really hot summer the year before, so the water was well down. I'd already learned that with my chest waders on, I could just about wade out through this little deep gully close in, and then I could get out onto the shallow bar. It was only very close in, but I could go through this deep gully, right up to the top of your chest waders, and then you come up again and walked up onto shallower ground. Probably my first trip there, the year before, July time, end of July. I remember walking up there with a friend, Owen, who popped in to visit me. It was first trip, like I say, but we took a stroll down there, and right up on top of this shallow feature, this end of the bar if you like, but right up on top of it there was 3 fish feeding. I didn't know what ones there was at the time, it was early days, you know, it wasn't until as the weeks went on and I'd seen the fish more and more in the water, you get to recognise each one more, you know. But in hindsight, those 3 fish, well, the biggest one was spring gates for sure, it had that plump bum to it. And what were the other ones? The Mirror, which was always a regular down that end. I see that one down there a lot, and the Little Common. So, you know, that was the year before, and with that in mind, it was very hot and balmy as well, July time when we'd seen those. But with that in mind, I thought that that was going to be a likely area for the spring. So it was on the second of those early morning visits. On that occasion, I drove down with a bucket of bait and my chest waders, and I waded out onto the bar. I remember the year before, basically you had this bar, and on the very top of the bar where it was shallowest, it was bald, you know, like really, really clean, almost a little bit too blatant really. But then down the back of the bar was all silkweed everywhere. And the year before you'd had a spot that was probably this size on it, all swan mussel shells there and that, an obvious spot where they'd been flanking and feeding. Like I say, I hadn't followed it up so much the year before, but this year, that was the spot I had in mind. So I remember creeping out along the bar, and I couldn't find the spot at first, but eventually there was a little bit where the silkweed dropped lower, and I could see two little spots. Basically the silkweed had collapsed over the spot over the course of the winter, but I could see two little spots. They're probably matchbox sized, you know, tiny little bits where the remains of the clear spot, little sandy spots. And I had a bucket of bait, hemp, chewed nuts, a bit of pellet in there, chopped boilies, just about everything. And I put it all in, all over the silkweed as well. Got out, and I remember before leaving for home, I looked back at the spot and see the swan doing his bum up in the air, do you know what I mean? Kicking like they do, so I knew he was doing a good job for me. For the swan to get its head all the way onto the bottom, it was just out of reach. It was like 4.5 foot, but the sides and the silkweed, he was destroying, and that was a good thing. Now, this was early in the year, like I say, you know, it was sort of end of April time, you know, and really I wasn't expecting that spot to come into its own until later, you know, halfway through May really. But I kept baiting it, and it got clearer and clearer. I wasn't sure if it was all birds or the fish were getting in on the act as well. Another really good thing about it, I knew it was safe. You know, it was between swims. You had a swim, and then there was probably 30 yards before the next swim, and that whole section was overhanging trees. Lovely actually, there was a couple of good bits where I could get up and have half a view over the bar. But that was the other reason for choosing it. I knew it was safe, no one was going to see it. You couldn't see the spot glowing from the bank or anything. I mean, those carp really got about, you know, you'd see them all over the place. You got your four corners, and at some point of the day, you'd see at least one in one of the corners. They really did get a lot of distractions. You know, it's all very well to think, right, this is it. This is me, I'm staying here till I, like, you know, it doesn't often work like that. Because the water was so clear, and from most of the swims that I fished, I could see exactly what was going on, you know, just watching at night and at dawn. You know, I felt that I'd know when it was time to fish that spot, especially every time I waded out there, I could see how it was changing in shape and size, and you know, it started off as maybe, well, I couldn't see any swan mussel shells to begin with, but after 4 or 5 bait ups, there was literally a pile of them swept to one side, big swan mussel shells, you know, glistening there. And the best spot was slightly to the left. That was important that I marked up exactly where the best spot was, because it wasn't always clear. Sometimes you go out there and it was a little bit coloured, but you could always see those shells, you know, even if you could only just make them out, and then you knew to lower in just to the left. So, for the last 3 weeks, I've been baiting a spot in the edge. Only shallow, what, I don't know, 4 or 5 foot deep, close in. And I've been putting hemp on it, a few tiger nuts, chewing up as many as I can, like I always do, throwing them on the spot. A little bit of maize as well, salty maize. But we've had some cold weather so far this spring, you know, especially at night, early mornings and whatever. I've been all dressed up in me blimmin' thermals every morning, you know, it's been freezing. Not ideal for close in, and just this last 2 or 3 days we had a little bit of sun, things have started to improve. But in the meantime, rather than fishing me baited spot, I've been fishing on the swims either side of it in the deeper water. And I don't know, it's probably about 4 days ago now, I was sat in the swim next door with my mate Owen, and out the blue I've seen one come bobbing through from the right. He's just come chugging through, and then he's chugged back again, and I was pretty sure I knew where he'd come from and where he was going as well. He was going to my baited spot. So up until then I hadn't fished it. I didn't want to fish it until it looked right, you know. But I dropped in last night, my first night, 1 rod on the spot, waded it out, lowered it in, a couple of chewed tiger nuts around it, a little bit of hemp, and 3 o'clock in the morning, off it's gone, And the result of that, I was pretty sure I knew what that carp was as well when I was sat there with my mate, when I seen it swim past and going back and forth. I recognised it as one I knew as Nemo, like a 30-pound common. So yeah, done the first night on the spot. Nothing actually the first night, but second night, I did have a few liners the first night, and on the second night, 3 o'clock in the morning, half 2, 3 in the morning, it's trundled off, and as a result of that, old Nemo is now in the sacco. The colour of that. There's his little pick, like a little armlet. Character. Lovely old common. One of just 5, maybe 6, and there's a mirror. It's a very, very low stock. I think it's probably, trying to think, at least 30 nights since my last bite, probably 40, being honest. Most of those last year. Right. How's that? He's gone. Hopefully you got that, did you? Good. There's loads of nooks and crannies all around the lake, you know, and two of the corners you couldn't even fish properly. You know, they were really reedy or snaggy, one or the other. I'd been given a camera, if you remember, around that time, a little handy cam. And there was one day in one of those corners and I saw the lot. They all came in. It was perfect conditions, you know, little breeze blowing down, hot and sunny, you know, lovely day in May. All the scum, all the little clumps of weed and that was all coming down that end of the lake. It just looked bang on. And I saw white tips, that was the first one. Always gives himself away with a little wave of the old white tips on his tail. Spring gates was always, you know, it wasn't just elusive. I'm not even sure if I got him on film. I think I might have just about caught him in the corner of the frame, you know. But it was a hard one to see. He'd turn up and then be gone again pretty quick, whereas the others would all hang around. But yeah, that day I saw the lot. Long common, the mirror, the little common, you know, they were all there. Very few spots though. You know, that was the problem with it. It's not like you find all the fish and you think, right, I'll get a trap in here. You know, you can see the bottom and there is no spots. You know, it's just all weed. So barring a choddy, which they've already seen 100 times, you know, it was hard work. I ended up doing a bit of work in that corner. I raked it off, you know, with the old sea leads with the old prongs on, and I just bound it up with a little bit of tape and just kept donking it on the same spot. And I must have been at it an hour, you know, before I stopped lifting out any weed. You know, you just keep doing it on the same spot, and eventually I got a little clearing. We had good weather conditions forecast shortly after I'd cleared off that spot. I'd baited it once, and we had a southwesterly due to come in, so I dropped in there intending to stay there for a couple of nights, but only lasted one night. In the evening, the wind picked up, as forecast, picked up blowing down my end. And if you imagine where I was in this one corner, I'm looking across probably 40, 50 yards away at my spot, my baited spot on the bar as well, which I'd only fished the once. I'd only fished it the once and I'd caught Nemo off of it. But on this occasion, yeah, a couple of fish showed, similar to how they show when I'd seen them feeding on the margin spot. They'd always show just a little bit away from it, but I'd learnt that by now. You know, I was looking at the spot and they showed probably 2 or 3 rod lengths out from it, but I thought they're creeping it and they're feeding on that spot. The light was going by then. But first thing in the morning, I got a bit of bait ready. I remember I wedged it all into my baiting up pouch, half a jar of them and a few other odds and ends. Walked around there, chesties on, and you had to wade through like this deep gully, like I say. And I remember, and the light was very low. So I've got all my bait, and I thought, right, I'm going to put a little bit of bait in there. I wasn't planning on fishing it yet. I hadn't seen nothing going there. I was more interested in the other reedy corner where I'd seen them all a couple of days previous. But I've waded out, only taken a few steps, and I'm down into the deeper gully, and I thought, that water looks coloured. You know, when you just hesitate for a moment, especially at that time in the morning early. I thought, that looks like it's got a tinge in it. And I hesitated and thought, no, it's all right, it's all right. And I took 2 or 3 more steps forward and one scooted off and then another one scooted off to the side. In hindsight, it was the little common and spring gates. But anyway, I don't, you know, I thought, oh, I've probably blown it now, you know, so I might as well take the extra few steps. Once I was there, I didn't put in as much bait as I intended to. You know, by now I was thinking, I think I best move my kit round and fish, you know. So I only put a couple of handfuls in. But I crept back out again, went round, packed up all my kit, came back round. I was in no rush to get the rod in straight away. And I remember seeing white tips enter the swim from the left, usual thing, little wave with the old tail. And even from sat on my bed chair, no rod in the water yet, but even sat on my bed chair low down, it's so visible, especially when it's right up on the shallow bar, that sat on a bed chair from sort of a few yards away, and I could see its white tips of its tail feeding on top of the bar. It was a good view from there, but when I got up the tree, it was magnificent. You know, you're right above and you can see everything. And one that I couldn't see from the bank, but it was obviously feeding there all along, was the mirror. So you had white tips and the mirror feeding right close to each other. A white tips would do his circle, come round and then come back in, down onto the spot, really feeding. But madly enough, they weren't feeding directly on the spot. My spot was probably another 15 foot away, you know, down the back of the bar. They were feeding on the very, very shallowest bit, and that kind of threw me for a little bit. It's hard to explain, but basically, if for me to fish my mussel spot, the proper spot that I've been priming all this time, meant I'd have a line pretty much almost running over the top of where the white tips and the mirror was feeding. So I was a little bit torn, you know, and it wasn't until late afternoon, early evening really, when I waded out, once everything was quiet, fish had gone, they were in the snags by that time. But I waded out there and I remember struggling to make my mind up, do I go all the way, or do I, and I hadn't caught white tips or the mirror, you know, and I thought, I better drop short. But you know, when you're doing something, you know you're making a mistake, you know, and I dropped it short. It's probably only in about that much water, and it was pretty chilly that night as well. It was wrong, like nothing happened. You would have thought to yourself that nothing had ever been anywhere near it overnight, but I bet they had. They just fed on the other spot where the mussels was. I reeled that rod in pretty early in the morning. You know, I wasn't at all happy. It was a little bit cooler. You know, I knew there was no chance for bite, and I thought I'd rather not even have the line in the way. You know, if anything did come enter the swim, they always entered where that line was, and I didn't want to put them off at that mussel spot. You know, but late in the afternoon, when I'd been up the tree, could see there was nothing there, got a fresh rig ready, waded out there, and I hadn't looked at that mussel spot since the day before. But like what I said earlier about you'd never have known that anything had happened, when I got out there and looked at that mussel spot, oh my God, it was just absolutely great, like they'd been digging there all night, you know. More mussel shells than ever, you know, cleaner than ever. It just looked, I wish I'd filmed it to show you how good it looks. It really was bang on. But I lowered in the rig. It was clear enough for me to actually put the lead right up against the weed, you know, and rather than feed the line straight back to the swim, there was a few tall clumps. The weed was growing all the time. So you had Canadian coming up through the silkweed. But I sort of remember feeding it between it, you know, to try and get the line down low. But I got back, stepped out, rod on the rest and everything, trap was set. Quiet the first half of the night, wind eased off, you know, nice and calm, and I woke up. I remember it now actually, because I woke up to a take and it was just a few bleeps and stopped, and you come round sort of thing, and I got down to the rod and the rod was off the rest. In the evening time, there was little bits of weed drifting down that end of the lake, so in the evening time I'd sunk the tip even lower than normal, and because it was off at a right angle, you know, it obviously lifted the rod off the rest. But I got down there and the clutch was still ticking, pitch black. It wasn't until I got there, oh, what's this one on like? I picked up the rod, and I think I said earlier how when I was looking in the direction of where I was fishing, you had the lights. It was very, very early in the morning, literally just starting to get light, you know, but you had that pinky glow just forming, you know, and the lights from the road as well. So I could actually see my line cut up, and there was a big explosion, like just to the left of the bar, a little bit further from where I looked at, and then it just kited around, like all ploddy and that, and then into the edge, but a few turns of the rear land or what I had underneath the tip, you know. You know, it's like at that time in the morning, especially this bank, it was all dark trees and a dark overhang, and everything close in is in black and white, isn't it? You know, that's all you're looking at. And when it's back surface, facing away from the classic old gnarly dorsal out of the water and that, but it just looked angry and it looked black and silver. That's all you're looking at that time in the morning. It angrily went away from me, but I knew exactly what one it was then. Got him into the net. It was the long common, one of the 2 30-pounders that I'd caught the previous summer on my very first night. You know, if I can catch a new one every time, then obviously I'd rather, you know, repeats aren't really my thing. But it was a beautiful carp, you know, and In a lake with such a low stock, you know, you expect to get repeats. Do you know what I mean? I'd already caught 3 out of 6. Odds on 50% chance I was going to double up, and sure enough, it was one I'd already caught. But you can't be disappointed. You know, what a carp! Look at that. It's like he's been sent straight from Middle Earth, as proper as they come. It's almost a shame to lift him up. Looks beautiful enough there. I'll try and get an hold on him. What a beauty. It's one of just 6 carp in the lake. All very different. All unique. In fact, there's one common that's particularly unique. Beautiful, old, dark, you know, lovely, lovely, proper carp. 34 pounds of old gold. Back you go. I'll take one like that any day of the week. I think we all would. And today's a Sunday. Don't tell your mates. Now, I'd already done 3 nights by that time, you know, that was all I intended to stay. But after catching that long con, you can imagine I wasn't going home just yet, you know, so I was roughing it. I had all stubble and that, you know, you feel all horrible and sweaty, don't you know what it's like when you've been there 3 or 4 days in warm temperatures. It got quite balmy as well by then, you know, it had gone from cooler to just ideal conditions for fishing that sort of feature, only 4 foot deep at the most. I caught the long common, like I say, as it was getting light in the morning. Slipped him into a sack and everything, got him ready, and then as soon as it was light enough, I waded back out and got the rig back in place straight away. And remember earlier on I said to you it was good because I had a marker in the shape of that pile of swan mussel shells. It was a good thing. I remember when I got out there, I wished I waited another 10 minutes, but it was a little bit too late. I was out there then, and as you walked as well, you'd colour up the water behind you. So once you were there at the spot, you had to be pretty quick about it. If you hung around, then the cloud had covered the spot. But yeah, I got out there and it was really low light and there was colour in the water still. I'd only just caught one, you know, it'd obviously been fed on, but I could just about make out the shells, and I knew that all I had to do was lower in a foot or so to the left of that. You go 2 foot to the left and I was in weed. So I lowered in and out several times, you know, made 100% sure it was all right, looped on the hook link, bonk, it was in place. Another handful of hemp, a little bit of chopped nut, and probably half a dozen whole nuts, that was all, not a lot of bait. Took the rod back, again, fed it round the old bits of weed and that, got it all perfect, trap set. I knew it was going to go, you know, when you're super confident, you know, and the take came a little bit earlier than the long common, probably about 2:30 in the morning, you know, still pitch black. And from the second I picked up the rod, I knew it had to be 1 or 2 fish. You know, it went off weighty, took line, took about 20 yards off of me, swung round away from the bar, and it was just heavy, weighty. Took line, and eventually stopped. I led him all the way back, got him close in. Now, I haven't mentioned them up to now, but on top of that bar to my right, you had a snaggy tree line, but that was closer in, like, you know, but on top of the shallow stuff, you had a couple of old, like some old deadwood, a couple of old snags. Only little clusters, but they were still well rooted into the bar. I'd cleared a little bit of it, but I couldn't clear it all. And this fish, it must have been, you know, it sounds mad, but I bet like 3 or 4 minutes, it was powering away, like inches short of the first cluster of this deadwood, and like just powering. I'd get it back a little bit, get it back a rod length, and it'd yank it back off of me, like, you know, all the time, right up on the surface, thrashing, wallowing. And I'd already knew, you know, I talked to 1 or 2 people that had caught white tips in the past, and they said they reeled it in, you know, it doesn't fight very hard, whereas spring gates, everyone has said it really, really rucks. So, you know, usual thing, it wasn't one that I wanted to drop off, you know, I was pretty sure what it was. Got him in close, you know. At that time it was still pitch black, but I remember a big rounded head came out, like, you know, coughing water, and into the net he went. Always I have that little pause, you know what I mean, before shining the torch on, clicking the torch on, and there he was, like, you know, the one, spring gates.
I know what one that is. That's him. That's the big common. Oh, excuse the shaking.
£41, 41 and an ounce. How's that? Do you want to see that? Ah, pinky. That's him. How's he looking? All right?
So you've caught Springgate's tail, the one you went there for. Obviously white tips were still left, but when you've had the, you know, your number one target, does the drive naturally go?
Yeah. If I'd caught the other way round, if I'd caught white tips first, then I definitely would have stayed for Springgates. But in the circumstances, very low stock of carp as well. You've got to think I'd caught 3 the year before, and my first 2 fish the following year in 2019 were the same 2 of the ones that I'd caught the year before. If I stayed on there for another, you're only looking at 3 or 4 bites a year, you know, really, really hard as nails, to be honest with you, tricky little lake. So odds on, if I stayed on, I might be, if I have a good year, I might get another 3 or 4 carp. They could be the same ones that I'd already caught. So sometimes you just have to weigh it up, and I would have dearly liked to have added white tips to my photo album, but some, you can't catch them all. Some you just have to leave behind. Back you go. I missed my Sunday roast dinner for you. I got that when I get in, pigeon. Off she goes. Oh mate, I was over the moon, another special one. And it was the timing as well, it couldn't have been timed any better. I think Springgates came on June the 3rd, and we all know what happens in the middle of June, start of the old river season, and I'd moved my boat earlier that year to pastures new. So I had a whole new adventure to look forward to. Oh, I couldn't wait.